Hey, my name's Seth. I'm one of the pastors here. For those of you joining us online, thank you for using technology, whether it's live or delayed or, another day of the week. We're glad you can be here. Before we begin, I just want to echo everything that John just said. My years before I came here, I worked in student ministry for about 6 years. And I always said student ministry is the most fun ministry in the church. And I absolutely believe it. It's way more fun than you guys are. And if you, just kidding, you guys are awesome, right? You're fun, sort of. But sometimes. But along with that, man, we could use some qualified people. And you may not think you're cool enough to be in student ministry. You probably aren't, but that's okay, because students don't need somebody who's cool. Students need somebody who cares. And the thing you discover as you spend time with students is they just want an adult to love them. And if you're capable of doing that, then I think you're capable of being a volunteer. So talk to one of us afterward. We'd love to get you connected. All right, so we're finishing up our series, Life on the Edge. We've been in this interesting series for the last 5 weeks, and we've been talking about how our culture just constantly baits us to the edge and pulls us to the edge of our time, the edge of our friendships, the edge of our sexuality, the edge of all kinds of things, all kinds of edges. And we've been defining the edge as this. It's the point immediately before something unpleasant or momentous occurs or someone loses control. It's the point before we fall off, right? I mean, it's the point before that jumping jack hits the frame of the window of the car and bounces back in. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you need to go back and listen to the series, right? It's the point before you suffer harm because you were with the wrong group of people. It's the point before, you find yourself spread so thin, there's some relational tension, or you get to the point where your kids think the world revolves around them. It's the point before you've had too many drinks and, you don't remember the rest of the night. The edge is the point before you lose control and you suffer the consequences. And what we've been saying throughout this series is that it's fun to peer over the edge, but it's not fun to fall over it. It's fun to flirt with disaster, but it's not fun to actually live disaster. It's fun to have those friends who push us, a little bit out of our comfort zones, but it's not fun when you suffer harm for being the friend of a fool. It's fun to spread ourselves a little bit thin and keep busy and keep our kids and everything and set them up for a good future, but it's not fun when we have the relational tensions that come as a result. It's fun to push the edge sexually, but it's not fun. We won't go there because we went there last week. And if you were here last week and you made it back, as John said, congratulations, right? I mean, you lived through something exciting. So if you missed last Sunday, we talked about the edges of sexuality, and I would invite you, if you weren't here, go online, listen. If nothing else, it will be interesting, right? Even if you don't agree with it. And if there is any way we as a church can help walk alongside of you in any of these edges, we would love the opportunity to do that. That's what we are about. Now, that brings us to what we're going to talk about today. And I have a hunch about last week and a hunch about today. And my hunch is that of all the things that we've talked about in this series, as much as, you may have listened and been like, oh, I'm so glad my kids were here, my grandkids were here, whatever. Last week when we talked about sex, and this week when we talk about money, because we're talking about money today, these are the things that we're tempted to disregard the most. In fact, here's why. Because we could say sex and money are the two areas of our lives where we'd prefer God keep our nose out. Keep his nose out, not our nose, his nose, right? That we prefer God keep his nose out. And we kind of have this understanding that God doesn't want us to enjoy sex, and he wants us to pay for it. Not sex, but he wants us to give him our money, right? No. Yeah. And you guys are bad, right? You're like teenagers. But our big fear is that God wants, he has a no fun policy as it comes to these things. But here's what I would tell you, from a church staff standpoint, we get phone calls and text messages and web messages and all kinds of messages. And people step in and they want our help. And aside from hospital visits, I would say 75% of the reasons why people reach out to us is about one of these two things. And not necessarily, these may not be in the forefront, but they're certainly under the surface, and they're what's bringing the issue to light. And the funny thing is, as much as we want God to keep his nose out of these things, where do we turn when we need help? When things go south, when you find out you had a pregnancy that you weren't really hoping for at that point in time, when you find out you have an infection that you didn't have before, when you lose your job or you're kind of at the brink of your finances and you're living paycheck to paycheck, where's the first thing we turn to? Right? For most of us, we turn to God when the crisis hits. And I'm not saying God won't show up and that God won't step in and help, but I think there are times when God just wants to say to us, I wish you would have invited me in on the front end. Because if you had invited me in on the front end, and if you had listened to where I was trying to lead you, that tall guy with the microphone in that Life on the Edge series, like if you had paid attention, you would have saved yourself a world of hurt. And he doesn't say that because like he's down on these things, because he doesn't care about us. He says that because he loves you. And he cares about you, and he wants what's best for you. And God understands something very important, that living life on the edge will eventually harm you. Maybe not at first, right? I mean, you may be able to kind of skirt the consequences at first, or act like it's not going to influence you. But over time, the thing you discover is that those things show up in your life. So I've got good news for you. First one is God created sex, and second one is God doesn't need your money. But when you choose to follow Jesus, which I hope you do if you haven't already, and I hope that's a decision that you'll make. For those of us who have made that decision, we've found out something really important. We've discovered that God does not want something from you or from us. He has something for us, right? And he wants to bless you. And in one of the areas he wants to bless you is in the area of your finances. But don't misunderstand me. This is not a health and wealth message. I am not promising that God's going to, drop tons of money into your lap, because the truth is, if you live in America, God has already blessed you in your finances. And we miss this, right? We miss this, we forget it. But the truth is, I think God wants to lead us to a place of peace of mind when it comes to our money and our resources. If I were to ask you the question, especially over the last 2 years, but I mean, this is kind of an all skate, okay? So we can all participate in this. Who here has ever felt stress in their financial world? Yeah, I mean, if you're not raising your hand, you're lying in church. So watch out for that lightning bolt and scoot over from that person. You don't want to get struck, collateral damage, right? I mean, the truth is we have all felt stress at some point in time, and we've all wanted peace of mind. I mean, we've all wanted to get to the point where we weren't worried about would we have enough to pay the bills, when we wouldn't worry about are we going to have enough to retire when that time comes. We all wish we could have a peace of mind, and we all, to some degree, experience some stress in this important area of our finances. But the real question is, which do you trust in more, God or money? Because the reason why we find ourselves without a peace of mind as it comes to our financial world is because we're placing our confidence, our trust in our money, in our wealth, rather than in the God who provides for our wealth. And the truth is, in our culture, in our world, and I don't think it's just now because of how much Jesus talked about this. In fact, Jesus talked more about money than about heaven and hell combined. So, I mean, this was not just relevant for us 2,000 years after he was here on earth, but it was relevant 2,000 years prior and to the people even before then. That the God's biggest competitor for your trust is money. There's a French sociologist whose name I cannot pronounce. It's like Jean Bouillard or something like that. And he had this theory about the world, and he had this theory that material is kind of our new dominant system of meaning. In fact, he goes so far as to say that in America, atheism hasn't replaced Christianity. Consumerism has replaced Christianity. Consumerism is the new God of Americans, which may sound a little extreme, but then you begin to look at some things that were written years and years and years ago. One of them was by a Wall Street banker named Paul Mazur of the Lehman Brothers. Check out what he wrote. This is from years ago. He says, we must shift America. Think about this. This is like social engineering. We must shift America from a needs to a desires culture. Like, we've got to move away from, I just need this in order to survive, to, and I want that or I can't survive, right? I mean, I've got to have the newest, latest, greatest. Which explains why those of you who grew up with parents who maybe grew up in the Depression era, you see the world a little differently than my generation that looks at it, and my generation and younger that looks at it as like, oh, I want to have that. I want to consume that. He goes on, he says, this is concerning. People must be trained. Think about that. I mean, people must be trained to desire, to want new things, even before the old have been entirely consumed. He goes on, he says, we must shape a new mentality. Man's desires must overshadow his needs. which explains why Apple and Samsung release new devices every year, why there's always a new iteration of a car. It's why our clothes are designed to wear out after a season or two. It's why when you buy that new washer or dryer, it comes with a 1-year warranty, 90 days labor, right? And in 5 years, you're buying a new one. It's designed to break down. It's designed to push this desire to have something new because, hey, there's a new one that connects to the Internet of Things. And who doesn't want your washer and dryer connected to the Internet? Whatever. But the point is, this whole shift, this whole mentality is to move us to a place where we've got this thing within us, this hole, that we think we can buy something external to us to fill it. That it's somehow going to satisfy this need that's deep within us. So it's not at all surprising when Jesus stepped onto the scene that he said this really powerful and controversial and uncomfortable thing. You know what Jesus said? He said, no one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate the one and love the other, you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. And then he makes this bold proclamation, which you probably heard before. He says, you cannot, it's impossible to serve both God and money. It's impossible because as soon as money captures your heart, it begins pulling you in a different direction. We've talked about this before, so if you've been with us, this is not a new illustration, but when we begin pouring our money into things, whether it's a new car or new clothes or nice vacations or a retirement account, what happens to our hearts, right? Our hearts kind of go along where our money goes. Where your money goes, your heart flows, right? I mean, our heart moves in the direction of our money, which is why we get concerned about how our retirement accounts are doing, and we worry and stress out about it. It's why we worry and stress out about our kids, or at least one of the reasons, because we poured a ton of money into them, right? I mean, it's why we park our cars on the far side of the parking lot so they don't get dinged because, our money's gone there, and so our heart, it just kind of follows along with it. And there's this temptation to say, I've got this hole in my heart that I need to fill with something, and so I've got this external thing that I'm going to fill it with. Now, here's kind of two edges that I think our culture kind of pulls us up toward when we know that money's beginning to capture us. The first edge is consuming. Consuming is the idea that I need it, I've got to have it. That's what that Paul Mazur quote was talking about. Like, I've got to have the latest, greatest. I've got to take that nice vacation. I've got to, keep up. I've got to have the new car. I've got to, fulfill. It's when you click buy on Amazon, it's like, ooh, that made me happy, right? And then you track it every step of the way. Oh, it's 2 houses away, right? I mean, it's so exciting. It's so exciting. It's this uncontrollable urge for more. And it's when you begin working so that you can fund your lifestyle. When you begin working so you can fund your stuff and have more and more stuff, and then you get the side hustle, which is really just a second job, so that you can just get more and more. It's the acquisition. It's the desire to have it, to consume it. And then the other edge is hoarding. Hoarding is similar to consuming, but you're not consuming it right away. You're saving it in case you might need it someday, which is why literally every house in America has a jar of screws and nobody knows what they go to, right? But you might need it. You might need it because you assembled that IKEA piece of furniture and it came with 10 extras that you may or may not have missed somewhere in the steps. So you got to have it and you got to save it. It's why, we have more clothes than we can fit in our wardrobes or that we can wear. And so we got to have a place for our winter clothes. It's why, we have these retirement accounts that we want to fill up so that someday, right, we can retire and we can have enough and make sure that we'll be able to cover any of the eventualities of life, whether it's needing to go into assisted living or, whatever medical issues are going to come up. It's like we need to protect all of that. And hoarding has its own set of problems. We've got TV shows that highlight some of that. But for others of us who maybe aren't to that extreme, it's like, well, that's why we need the bigger house. That's why we need the storage unit. That's why, we need to grow our accounts so that we've got enough. And there's a root to both of these things. And do you know what the root is? It's a little uncomfortable, maybe even a little bit surprising. The root of both of these is greed. Greed is the assumption that it's all for my consumption. Maybe keyword there is my. It's for me. It's for me to enjoy now, or it's for me to store up so that I can enjoy it later. The point is that it's all for me. It's for my happiness. It's for my satisfaction. It's to fulfill that hole within me. And so I believe all this stuff external to me is finally going to satisfy me. Greed is when money leads our hearts rather than when our hearts lead and direct our money. And greed is so subtle, and the shift of moving to greed is so subtle. And I'm telling you, in our advertising and just in our culture in general, we are pushed so close to that edge. And the question is, where does that leave God in the midst of our financial world? For many of us, I think God is our financial backup plan. Like when things go south, when suddenly, we were laid off and we weren't planning for it, right? We had one too many payments we couldn't really afford. And, the salesman told me I could afford it, but he didn't assume that, I had the money to pay for it if it broke down or pay for the insurance for it or the upkeep of it, right? We bought one too many happy things, the things that we thought would make us happy, and it didn't end up actually making us happy. Or maybe there was a bad year in the market, right? And you look at your retirement accounts and they're draining, and it just kind of creates all this stress. And so we move to the direction of God in those moments as our financial backup plan. But the result of kind of living life on the edge as it comes to this financial world is stress. I mean, it's just stressful. And you get to the edge of things and it's like one more bill pulls you over the edge, or a new rise to the gas prices pulls you over to the edge, or the inflation rate goes up another couple percentages, or 10%, whatever, and it just kind of pulls you to the edge, or there's a medical issue and it pulls you to the edge. And we're finally living paycheck to paycheck, and we're so stressed out, and it's stressing our relationships out. Money is like the number one cause of divorce in our country because we're allowing it to try and fulfill something within us, something that God designed to be fulfilled with himself. And stress doesn't lead us to life to the full that Jesus invited us to, that we've been talking about through this series. I think sometimes we imagine life to the full as a nice retirement, traveling whatever we want, vacations, buying whatever it is that we want all the time. But Jesus said, I have something different for you. I have something better for you. Because our definition of life to the full tends to be where money is our God. Jesus has something far better. When money becomes our God, we will suffer painful consequences. Not because God's punishing us, but because money is a terrible God. Money is a terrible God, and it has an insatiable desire that can never actually be fulfilled. And the funny thing about greed is that we don't even see it in ourselves. We can sometimes point it out in other people, but when we look in the mirror, it is so difficult to see. So understanding how powerful money is and what money can do to us, it's not at all surprising that Jesus would speak into this. Now, there's an account we're going to look at. It's recorded in the Gospel of Luke. Luke is Luke's rendition of what happened when Jesus was here on earth, and he did all kinds of research. And there were times when Jesus was out teaching, and somebody would interrupt him with a question, or in this case, it's a statement. And this is an account that Luke recorded for us in his research about what happened when Jesus was here on earth. Now, Jesus was considered a rabbi, and often rabbis were brought in to kind of arbitrate situations and disagreements among people. And so that's what's going to take place in this account from Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 13. Here's what happened. Someone in the crowd said to him being Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, just in case you're curious, anytime somebody tells Jesus he needs to do something, it's generally not going to happen, okay? So, Jesus isn't going to wade into this mess. In fact, what you discover, and I was thinking about this earlier today, like whenever people tell Jesus something, he generally uncovers there's some kind of heart issue behind it. He's like, no, this is what you're concerned about, but there's something deeper going on here. Now, for this guy, divide my inheritance with me, it's probably a situation where his brother, maybe the parents left them a vacation home, right? It's a non-liquid asset, and so in order to divide it, you'd have to sell it and then, divide the resources. So that's probably kind of the situation. But Jesus is like, look, I'm not going to get into this, but there's something below the surface we are going to talk about. So Jesus replies, he says, man, or dude, right? That's our vernacular. Dude, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Like, this is your own deal, right? You figured that out with your brother. But there's something inside we need to talk about. And so we're going to spend some time talking about. We look at the situation, we say there's an external thing here. And Jesus says, no. There's something deep within. There's a heart issue. So he continues on. Then he said to them, watch out, or pay attention. This is like the warning lights go off in your head. This is what we've been talking about in the series, like your conscience is dinging. Like, okay, so we need to pay attention here. You ready for this? This is important. He says, watch out, be on your guard. Continuing on, be on your guard. And be on your guard is actually a present active verb. So what he's saying is this isn't something you're on your guard about once. This is an ongoing thing. This isn't something that you're going to solve one time and you're finished with it. This is going to be something that you're going to kind of work through your whole life. So he says, be on your guard against all kinds of, now you may, no, go back. Oh man, no, it wasn't supposed to go up yet. Okay, go back. Kind of ruined it, but that's all right. Okay, so be on your guard against all kinds of, now you know what it says, but let's just imagine you didn't know what it says, okay? Let's just imagine you weren't really aware of where Jesus was going. And this is why it's so important, because when somebody says, beware, right, there are certain things that, we want to beware about. Like if somebody tells me, beware of the snakes up ahead, like, whoa, right? I mean, freak out time. I don't like snakes. Or some of you, beware of the spiders or beware of blood, right? I mean, we'd take that very seriously, wouldn't we? Some of you. But if somebody said, beware, there's a puppy up there. Oh, or a basket of kittens. I don't know. I don't really like cats. But, that's so terrifying, isn't it, right? I mean, here's the thing. I think that when we read this and when we see what Jesus is going to say here, our temptation is kind of to respond with, well, that's not something to be worried about. Right? I mean, a bucket of cute puppies, right? I mean, who cares about that? Like, that's not concerning. In fact, so we'll go ahead and put up what he said. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Right? And we read that and nobody cares. In fact, nobody in here was like, oh, amen, right? Oh, yes, preach it, Seth. That's so good, right? I mean, I need to be aware of greed. No, I mean, none of us are like that. That's like, beware of that herd of cute puppies. Now, if I had said junior high girls, a herd of junior high girls, that would be terrifying. They're not terrifying by themselves. But together, I've worked with them. Anyway, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, right? I mean, who thought the guy was being greedy? He had an inheritance that was left to him by his parents, and his brother wouldn't give him what he deserved. I mean, don't we take people to court over that? And don't we say, hey, that was mine. It should have come to me. Who thought the guy was being greedy? None of us think the guy was being greedy. We do the same thing. And yet Jesus recognized, look, and this is really important because sometimes I think we think of greed as like, okay, the person who has all this stuff, they're greedy. No, you can actually have a lot of stuff and not be greedy. And you can have nothing and be incredibly greedy. Greed has little to do with how much you have. Greed has to do with what's going on deep inside. Which is why Jesus says, hey, you've got to be careful. Because if you're not careful, greed will begin gripping your heart. It is an internal problem. He goes on, and this is really good. He goes on, he says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. And then he says life. Now, I'm just pausing here for a second because we've been talking about how Jesus said, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. And the word life that Jesus used in the Greek, there are a couple words that get translated into life, but the one that's used here is the same that Jesus used at another time. It's Zoe life. In other words, there's this God-shaped hole inside each one of us that God sent his son, Jesus, to die for us to begin fulfilling that need within us that we think we can fill with external things. The things that we can buy, the things that we can earn and work toward and have. That Jesus wants to freely give us. Zoe life is a relational life that God wants to give you. And so he goes on and he says, look, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. And then he says, life doesn't consist of the abundance of possessions. Like you can try and acquire all those things to fulfill this God-shaped hole inside of you, but it won't work. Life doesn't consist of that stuff. Life that actually matters. I mean, those are all external and they're wonderful and all that good stuff, but it's not going to satisfy a deeper need within. In fact, here's kind of Jesus' warning in a nutshell. He's like, be on your guard against the temptation of trying to satisfy your life with things. Things being whatever things fill up your life, whether it's stuff or accounts or retirements or vacations or whatever, like they will not satisfy you. They will not satisfy the hole that we have within us. And we know that, don't we? Some of you are retired and you're still stressed out. You saved prudently and you're still wondering, is it going to be enough? Some of you have bought that happy thing that you thought would make you happy finally, and it didn't work, and so you had to buy another one, or you went on that vacation and it was, that was the thing that was going to make you so happy, and it lasted for a month. Maybe you're still making payments on the happy whatever it was, or you're trying to sell it at a loss. We know it doesn't work, and yet we still try and do it. Which is why Jesus offers us something far better. So to try and help this guy understand this, and not just this guy, I think us and the whole audience, Jesus told them a parable, which is really just a story with a meaning, a divine story. And he goes on, he shares this. He says, he told them this parable. He says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. So all of us are kind of like, well, this doesn't matter to me because I'm not a rich man. But let me just say this. If you have ever replaced something that wasn't worn out, just because you wanted something new. If you've ever gotten a new car your old one was fixable, but you wanted a new one. If you've ever painted your house because you didn't like the color anymore, or changed the carpet because it didn't match what you needed or wanted, right? And you had the resources to do it. A rich person is just a person who has more than he or she needs. That's not a bad thing. Jesus isn't being critical of the rich person. Don't misunderstand that. This isn't like, down on rich, scorn on rich. That's not what Jesus is getting at here at all. But he says the ground of a certain rich man, it yielded an abundant harvest. And this is really important to understand because the ground has little to do with the rich man. I mean, sure, he owns the ground. And sure, you may have invested money into that, or, he gets this bumper crop, lucky him, right? It's like that stock that you bought right at the right time. I mean, it just shot up, right? Or it's, the country of origin that you're from. We don't really know what made this man rich, but the thing we can understand through this part of the parable is that it's an undeserved blessing. Now, that may have made you a little uncomfortable, the idea of an undeserved blessing. Because you think, well, no, I worked for that. I worked hard for that. I took the risk of that investment. I did the thing that I worked my tail off. I planted those crops. I harvested, right? I mean, and that's true. That's true. But if you've ever been to a country where we lived in Brazil for a year, and I got to be honest, I saw Brazilians working probably 10 times harder than most Americans I've ever known. Not true of all Americans, but they work really hard. They work their tails off. And they lived at about 10% of the lifestyle that we Americans live at. Most of them didn't own a car. If they owned one, it was one for their family. Most of them couldn't afford a house. They were living in apartments that they rented. And it wasn't because they didn't work for it. It wasn't because they didn't try. They just didn't have the abundant harvest. Their land didn't have the abundant harvest that our land has. Nobody forced you to be born in America. That was kind of the luck of the draw. Right? I mean, not that there's no work involved. Don't misunderstand that. And this, again, it wasn't about guilt. But there is a responsibility piece that Jesus is going to get to. So the ground of a certain man, rich man, yielded an abundant harvest. He continues on. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. I mean, my barns are already full. I've got all this extra stuff. My closets are full. My storage unit is full. My basement's full. We got to figure it out. So he had an idea. Here's what he said. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I'll store my surplus grain. All right, perfect solution, more space, more storage, get a bigger house, figure out how I can keep it all because I have this abundant blessing. Now, this doesn't seem like a heart issue to us at this point in time, but it is a heart issue, and here's why. Jesus continues on. He says, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Remember our definition of greed, the assumption that it's all for my consumption. Now, we read this and we're like, hey, retirement, right? I mean, that's what I've been working toward. Eat, drink, and be merry. I've stored up enough so that I can just take it easy. I don't have to work anymore. I can put my feet up, right? He's got these big barns. I mean, he's living life. Jesus just painted a picture of Scrooge McDuck for us, in case you were curious. If you've seen DuckTales from the 1980s, that fun cartoon, only me, apparently. So, I mean, Scrooge McDuck, this wealthy guy with a vat of money, they went swimming in it every afternoon, and nobody liked him because he was miserable. He did it all for himself with little indication or consideration or appreciation for the generosity that had been shown to him, this abundant harvest that he had very little to do with. Continue on, it says, but God said to him, you fool. Now, throughout our series, we've been talking about the wise person and the fool, how the wise person understands life is connected and today leads to tomorrow, but the fool believes like they can just live life however they want and the consequences aren't going to come at them. The fool believes that stuff will bring them life. And yet the truth of the matter is we know stuff will not bring us life. The fool forgets who holds their life. The text continues as Jesus tells this story. He says, this very night, your life, and this isn't talking about Zoe life, this is talking about like just your physical body life, it will be demanded from you. Now this sounds harsh because like, okay, tonight your time's up, right? Your card's being pulled. God's demanding your life back from you. Now the word demand here, I was kind of curious, so I looked it up. It's the Greek word apateo, which means to ask back. The implication of to ask back means it didn't belong to you in the first place. It was on loan. The man's life was on loan to him for a season of time, and he was responsible to the person who loaned it to him for what he did while he had it. And when God asks for your life back, you cannot tell him no. He goes on, he says, this very night your life will be demanded from you, then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? You got it for you, you saved it for you, you thought you would spend it all on you, you thought you would enjoy the fruits of your labors, but you forgot that your life was simply on loan, that this was temporary. So who gets it all? Ever thought about that? In fact, let's get a little personal, right? As if it hasn't been already. When you're gone, who's going to get, or who will get the things you want to spend the rest of your days enjoying? My guess is you don't know the answer to that question. I know the answer. You know what it is? Someone else. Yeah, I mean, someone else is going to get it. And you don't know who. You may have a will, but there's no guarantee that's going to be executed the way you want it to be executed. So you had this on-loan life that you spent for yourself, and now you're going to be held accountable for it. And you've used it on yourself, but your possessions mean nothing before God. What means something before God is your heart's response to him here on earth. And how you respond to him when he calls out to you, and you have this God-shaped hole in your life that you try and fill with stuff, and whether or not you respond and say, I'm going to fill it not with stuff, because that's not going to matter in the end. I'm going to fill it with him. Now, you may hear that and you're like, okay, Seth, you just want more of our money, right? I mean, you're just trying to increase the offerings. But I just want you to know, Jesus never took an offering. As far as we know, Jesus never, ever, ever took an offering. After he shared this parable, he didn't take an offering. Jesus never said wealth is evil and all the rich people are going to hell. That is something Jesus never said. In fact, there's a point in time where this woman pours an expensive jar of perfume on Jesus' feet, and Judas is like, hey, that money could have been used to feed the poor. We know Judas didn't have the best judgment. And so Jesus said to Judas, no, the poor are always going to be with you. What this woman did is a beautiful thing. There is a place for resources. There is a place for wealth. Wealth isn't evil. This is not about guilt. This is about responsibility. This is about asking the question, God, my life is on loan from you. What do I do with my life for the time that I have it? Here's what Jesus finishes with. He says, this is how it will be for whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. They'll misunderstand the purpose of life. And they'll miss out on what God ultimately has for them, the life that he wants to lead them to, the Zoe life, a life of peace and contentment. Not a life of more and more stuff that will never actually satisfy. A life understanding that my life is on loan for a season, and I'm responsible for what I do with it during my days here on earth. It's a life of asking this important question on the front end. God, what do you want me to do? Stick that up there. God, what do you want me to do with what you've given me? God, what do you want me to do with what you've given me? Now, don't miss this, because this is not just the point of this particular message. This isn't just the point of this particular series. This is the point of life. This is the point of what Jesus was leading people to. Saying, okay, God, my life is a stewardship and I'm responsible for what I do with it here on earth. So God, what do you want me to do with it? But do you know what our culture's answer is to the purpose in life? Our culture's purpose in life is live for the sake of yourself. If it feels good, do it. If it looks like fun, why not? If it helps numb your pain, go for it. If it makes you feel love, whatever. If it helps you keep up with the Joneses, go ahead and keep up with them. But the problem with living life for the sake of yourself is at the end of the day, all you have to show for yourself is yourself, and that's a very shallow life to live. And if you've ever been to a funeral of somebody who lived his or her life for himself, it is a tragic, sad funeral. Because you look at your life and you say, you did nothing. You did nothing but look out for you. But what's bigger than God? I mean, when we begin leveraging our lives for what God has for us, God shows up in a remarkable way. That's when he leads us to life. Life beyond anything that we could imagine. That's what it means to have meaning, right? To leverage your life for something bigger than yourself. That's the point of having meaning. And Jesus calls us to that life. But it is not something outside of us that we can acquire. It is something that God does inside of us. And the reason why Jesus talked about money so much is because he understood that money is so powerful and it just constantly pulls us to the edge. Which is why we have to be so careful, why we have to set boundaries. And for the last couple minutes here, I'm not going to go greatly in depth in this, but I think, the way we kind of create boundaries for ourselves from the edge of money is that we flip the script on our money. We flip the script on our money because the script our culture gives us is that we live kind of first, we spend it on ourselves, do whatever it is that we want, and then we save, if there's a little bit extra, we save, and then if we feel guilted by the policeman standing on the corner or whatever, the prompting at the checkout line, we give. If there's something left over, if we haven't spent it all in living and saving and giving is last. But when we flip the script on our money, what we do is we kind of say, money, you're not going to have control over me anymore, and I'm going to direct it the way I want. I believe God wants me to direct it. And when you give first, you choose a percentage to give. I think a percentage is important. I'm not going to tell you what percentage, and I'm not going to tell you where to give it, because if you think I've got, impure motives, give it somewhere other than community church. Right? I hope at some point you give here, but if not, choose a percentage. Because as your income goes up, your giving and your generosity should go up, because as your income goes up, it's so easy to feel like, ooh, I can buy something else, and ooh, I can have the next greatest thing. And when you choose to invest a percentage, you're saying, no, I'm going to continue growing in my generosity because it all belongs to God, and it is just on loan to me here on earth, and my life is on loan, and so I'm just going to make the decision up front to give right away. I have seen people get out of financial holes by choosing to give first. And then the second thing is you save, you be prudent, because Jesus wasn't down on money. He wasn't down on being wise. He wasn't down on, preparing for the future. But I'm just telling you, you can't prepare for everything in the future. You just can't prepare for everything in the future. So choose a percentage, save a percentage, and then live on what's left. But in order to do that, you have to have a budget, right? And we don't like that word. So you can call it a spending plan if you want. That's a nicer way of thinking about it. You get to spend money on God's things, you get to spend money on your future life, and then you get to spend money now. Yay, right? I mean, that'll help us fulfill those desires. But in order to do that, you've just got to be disciplined and work toward that. And there are a couple tools Carrie and I use on a regular basis. One is a financial software called You Need a Budget. YouNeedABudget.com. In fact, we put a link in the message thing on our website and in the app if you're interested. We use that actively. We stopped using it for a while and we said, no, we need to go back to using it. It's good for us and it helps us keep on track. Another one is an app we use called Greenlight that gives each of our kids a debit card, and it allows us to help them, earn money for jobs around the house. And then we say, okay, a percentage is going to go to your allowance, a percentage is going to go to saving, a percentage is going to go to giving, and then you can spend the rest. And we're helping them work through those things at a young age, not because the church needs our kids' money, but we want them to understand the importance of giving and being generous and saving and preparing for the future and then getting to, spend at the end. Those are very helpful tools that we use actively. If you need help in this area, we would love to help you. My point is that if you don't control your money will control you. It will control you. Which is why you have to be so careful. You have to put boundaries in place. And when you flip the script on your money, when you just it loses its power when you choose to give it away first. But listen, life on the edge isn't just about avoiding painful consequences. Life away from the edge isn't just about, avoiding regret. It's about stepping into what God actually has for you. The life he has for you. Life that's truly life. The place that he wants to invite you to, that Jesus, when he was on earth, moved people in the direction of. Accumulating stuff, right? I mean, it's fun for a minute, but it doesn't give you long-term satisfaction. Having cool friends who pull you to the edge, that's fun for the moment, but it's not fun when you suffer the consequences. Living free sexually, right? I mean, it might seem great in the moment, but there are long-term repercussions. God has something so different. So what if you began asking that question we asked just a minute ago? God, what do you want me to do with what you've given to me? God, what do you want me to do with what you've given me? God, how do you want me to spend my on-loan life for you? God, what do you want to do in me and through me? How do you want to bless the people around me? How might you use me? How might you give my life meaning as I step away from the edge? What if you ask this question? Where might God lead you? And how might he want to bless you and help you live life to the full? Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, this is certainly not easy stuff to talk about. It's not easy to hear, particularly when we've grown up in the world we've grown up in, where material stuff, it is the dominant form of meaning in our culture. We're constantly bombarded with messages that, if we just had this or got to do that vacation or whatever, we'd finally be satisfied. But the truth is, it is a carrot in front of a horse. It never, ever satisfies. And so, God, I just pray for every one of us that we would begin asking that important question. God, what do you want me to do with what you've given me? Help us to understand that our lives are on loan. Our time on earth is on loan. Help us to use it for your kingdom, for your glory, for building into the lives of others, for leveraging it for your purposes. God, for the person who's just kind of on the brink financially, would you help them to take a step back? Would you help them to get help? Reach out to us so we can help walk alongside of them. God, I just believe you have something good for us. But I also know it will never come from something external or a thing that we can acquire that will somehow make us happy. But God, that you want to do something inside of us to lead us to life to the full. So God, give us each wisdom to know what we need to do with what we've heard today and through the series, and then give us courage to do it. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.